Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. All right, welcome back. Another week. We're happy to have you back again. And this week, we have a special guest. In addition to Dan and myself, we have Chuck Klein from West Virginia Public Broadcasting, and he is going to talk about his program called Edible Mountain. And Chuck, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to meet you, Chuck, and welcome to the show. And you are the special guest, because apparently Karen and I are no longer special guests in the show.
No, we're called hosts, you see.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what happens. The evolution.
So one of the reasons we wanted to have you on is because we've been talking about a new initiative called forest farming, trying to get that up and running in the region. And Edible Mountain is a really cool program that talks about a lot of different aspects that can be blended into forest farming. Tell us a little bit about the show and what people could expect from it and where you're trying to go with it.
Well, the show is on West Virginia Public Broadcasting. It's a digital show currently, so you can find that at wvpublic.org and on the West Virginia Public Broadcasting Facebook. That's where pretty much all the shows are posted as well. They're basically bite-sized little videos about, I usually have ethnobotanists on, or a naturalist, or even a scientist or a chef, of people using what we can find in our beautiful garden that is Appalachia. There's so much diversity in here, so I have no limits to my content. And it's basically about what you can eat, or what you can make medicine out of, or what kind of plants you can make textiles out of. It's kind of a hoot. I've even played with things like, one of the episodes is how to make wooden spoons, just foraging wood for that. But I think this is the reason why I pitched it to West Virginia Public Broadcasting a few years ago. A few years back, I tried to learn some stuff from an old timer up in Preston County where I lived, and then he passed away, and I lost a bunch of stuff that he knew. And I figured this stuff is going away quick, this kind of knowledge, and we need to grab it, archive it, so future generations can understand that the plants around us are extremely important and have a ton of potential. There's a bunch of plants that have not been researched in Appalachia. You know, I always cite the mayapple, for example. It's a lot of people don't realize it's one of the more harvested plants within Appalachia. It's probably cultivated more for its purposes, but it has a chemical in it, podopilatoxin, that is used in cancer treatment and wart removal products. And that was basically, I think it was the University of Mississippi, maybe. There was a natural products lab down in that area that did the studies to figure out how to get the mayapple to produce more podopilatoxin. The mayapples like to be in shade, and they learned that if they can stick that plant out in a bit of sun, stress it out, it creates a tremendous amount of podopilatoxin into the tops of the plants. So then to get that chemical, we can just harvest the tops of those plants sustainably, keep that plant alive, and have this to, fight cancer.
Sounds like you're trying to make some cultivar varieties out of some of these wild plants out there that have a lot of potential.
Yeah. And there's a ton of plants that we haven't studied yet.
Oh, definitely. And I really like your name, Edible Mountain. Just kind of puts a good picture in your mind, and it just leaves you with that mystery of so many different things that you could see, and on a mountain, on a hillside, on foothills. And it's a whole different type of agriculture. So it's very interesting what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, what I've discovered in my journey, originally I was hitting only ethnobotanists, but then I hooked onto a few scientists that are doing some interesting studies. One thing I have found is that there's just plenty of plants out there that we just don't know about.
Well, I know Karen and I have discussed some of the things that grow on these forested landscapes like ginseng, and we never talked about mayapple, which is I always see it on hillsides and just the edges of forests, and when you're going through trails, and never really gave it much thought. I've always found it a very interesting plant. Seems to all come up at the same time, flower at the same time, but never, and this is why you're doing what you're doing, is because there's so much knowledge to be learned about all these different plants. And just like some of the major crops we have were cultivated by the Native Americans. We talk about corn, we talk about squash, and look at the potential that they had, but somebody had to get started somewhere. It's a very big project that you're doing with this Edible Mountain.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn. I always, when I think about how the Native Americans fed themselves, and it's kind of an example of why I'm trying to do this show, is that the Native Americans relied heavily on the acorn, and they had nutting stones, they had nutting parties. Essentially, everybody put effort into turning acorn into flour, removing the tannins. And the mass of the acorn, I read somewhere once that the mass of the acorn outweighs the mass of every other nut on the planet, cultivated and wild. And here we are in our today and age, we don't even touch the acorn. There's a massive food potential falling around us, and we wonder why squirrels are so successful in the parks. They're the ones that are eating this superfood. They've got plenty to eat. I've never seen a skinny squirrel.
Yeah, neither have I.
And I'm sure the deer enjoy it too.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of animals eat acorn, and especially when you look at the cycling of the mast production for our forests, we have a very high mast production in our forests with different varieties of oaks between just the white oaks versus the red oaks. There's still I'm trying to figure out how many different oak species there are in Appalachia. I believe it's at least 20. It's probably a little higher than that. But the biodiversity in Appalachia is extremely high. We hear a lot about the medicinal plants in the rainforest, but if you really want to get into the details, Appalachia is a temperate rainforest. And it's also one of the oldest forests around. So you think about this landscape that's been developing for thousands upon thousands of years, creating a vast biodiversity. And there's a lot of plants in our woodlands that we don't even think about. We just walk right by. We might think they have a pretty flower, or we might not even notice it at all. But if you go back historically, they're very good food sources. There's a lot of potential for the plants in our woodlands. And so programs like Edible Mountain, I think, are really a great opportunity to capture some of that historical knowledge to bring it to the next generation, where there is a blossoming interest in these historical plants and trying to protect the biodiversity in our climate as it changes.
Right. Even popular plants, such as the ramp. I've been following a grant-funded group out of Penn State who are doing a pretty extensive study on ramps, hitting the phytochemistry and checking the DNA to prove actually how many real species there are. But ramps have become pretty trendy in the last few years, and we honestly don't have enough base information to know what we're actually doing to that population alone. And that's the kind of thing that I like to grab hold of with Edible Mountain. I feel like it's a service, We all love ramps. We're out there harvesting them. Here's what the scientists say about it now. Here's what they're studying. Here's what they've learned. We need to know that information so we don't destroy our incredible biodiverse garden we have.
Yeah, and I really do love how you blend the historical context and the cultural uses of these plants with the new scientific information that's coming out around them, and just blending that all together. I think that's a really great service that you're doing. So thank you.
I have recently been given the green light, and I'm doing pretty good with it, to create a TV series for television under the name Edible Mountain. And the first episode, I'm just simply calling This Is Our Garden. And it's a bunch of different people, ethnobotanists, naturalists, mycologists, scientists, all basically showing you how really diverse this place is and how much magic and how much potential we have. It's kind of an introduction to the series because I want people to think in that mindset when watching the series. One of the other episodes that's important is I'm doing a full episode on forest farming, because it's come to light that even the consumer base out there that's buying herbs from stores and whatnot are educated enough to know that some of these plants we are eradicating in the wild populations, and they don't necessarily want to do that. They don't want to buy a product that's doing that. So forest farming is starting to get a kick in the butt as far as taking some of these wild plants that are sought after for medicine or food and actually producing them as a crop with understory on an Appalachian hill. There's a lot of potential for people that are landowners to get involved. It takes a little bit more time, but it does need to be treated as a crop. And I want that to put that bug in people's ears with that particular episode.
Yeah, and it's really great that we're starting to see these potentials for forest farming as an actual agricultural venture and not just something that foragers are doing, because it's now recognized as an agricultural production system for the U.S. farm census. So if you are a forest farmer and you are harvesting the crops that you are raising in the wild areas, you can still be counted on the farm census. And we really do encourage you to make sure that you are signed up for the farm census and that you are responding to it. The Census of Agriculture is going to be coming out to producers in December of this year. And so if you are not on or already receiving the Census of Agriculture, you can sign up at www.nass.usda.gov. That's www.nass.usda.gov, and get yourself signed up for the Census of Agriculture so that we can know who's farming and who's growing things in their woodlands.
Yeah, and Chuck, just kind of shifting gears a little bit, what are your thoughts on all the different types of wild berries that we find in the forest landscape here in Appalachia? It seems to me like there are just so many different berries, and that's gaining a lot of popularity now. Superfoods and things that have high phytochemicals in it, plants that have all these antioxidants to help prevent cancer and these diseases. But I know, people say that these berries are packed full of really good things. And I was wondering maybe some of the work you've done on the berry side.
I actually would love to touch a little more on berries. And that might be a future episode for the TV series, just the general berries. But one thing I do like about berries is it's not necessarily, it's kind of like a sustainable harvest. A lot of those berry plants like blackberries, even the invasive wineberry, will produce more berries because it's being picked. And it's definitely a huge possibilities and opportunities in berry production in Appalachia.
Yeah, I know elderberries are getting a lot of popularity.
They are.
Service berries. And, that's all stuff that we typically find around here. And, as far as a cultivar, obviously raspberries and blackberries, strawberries, those things have really taken off. But there's just so many different varieties of berries that I'm always very fascinated with that diversity.
Right.
There's a lot of shade-grown berries, too. A lot of people think when you're growing berries, you need to have full sun. And, full sun for our cultivar varieties are typically the way to go. But when you're looking at forest varieties, a lot of them will grow well in the shade, especially when you start thinking about blueberries, huckleberries, and things like that. they do quite well in the shade, allowing you to have that overstory canopy for timber production while also having a harvestable crop on an annual basis while you're waiting for that timber to mature, and allows you to have that extra source of income from your woodlot without even having an excessive amount of acreage. You can harvest forest products on very, very small acreages.
Right, right. And I think that kind of adds to another point, like with the opportunities for agriculture, like the huckleberry, kind of likes a little bit of higher elevation. Maybe you can't get something else to grow up there, but there's possibilities with cultivating huckleberry. I think you have to deal with some bear probably, but they love it.
Well, that's that's a slight deterrent. I mean, keep your wits about you. Well, and that goes the case even just, being out in the woods and hiking. Always let somebody know where you are. That's probably good advice.
Yeah, someone close, especially if you're going out to check on ginseng. Make sure that you trust that person. And there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also been some really good publications that have been put out to help people get started in forest farming. And one of them is called Growing and Marketing Ginseng, Golden Seal, and Other Woodland Medicinals. It's a really great publication. And that's a great one to pick up if you want to get started in forest farming or growing medicinals. And it is guided to, we always talk about being a farm and being productive and sustainable and being able to have a sustainable harvest while also having a sustainable income. And so we want you to be able to maintain that landscape in a healthy way so that it can then sustain not just you, but future generations.
Yes, for sure. And forest farming by nature it almost seems like it'll be more profitable for the later generations. Some of these plants, especially like ginseng, even ramps, take a good bit to grow. Golden seal will grow pretty quickly. And there are some issues in that world as well. Like ginseng, for example, is listed on CITES, and there's a ton of regulations that can almost hold back the cultivation. I was just recently out in Wisconsin looking at some ginseng farms out there, and they've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of plants per field, but every one of those plants is still underneath that CITES treaty, under federal law, under state laws. I couldn't take one root from there and cross the state line and bring it to West Virginia for various reasons, but the actual laws themselves. And there's a lot of people within that ginseng community that really would like to see ginseng, at least certified cultivated ginseng, be recognized by the Fish and Wildlife at the federal level, so that we can actually produce this as a crop rather than a foraged item. So there's some bumps that we have to get over in that world, especially a plant that takes 20 years to become profitable.
Right. And also when you're talking about, trying to preserve that biodiversity, there are concerns that if we do import other varieties of ginseng, that they could crossbreed with our native varieties and pollute the stock, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely.
So those are all concerns that those laws are trying to build in. But again, yeah, you're exactly right that sometimes our regulations that are designed to protect a plant kind of get in the way.
Yeah, there's definitely a place for that treaty for CITES for sure. We probably wouldn't have ginseng if it wasn't for it. Maybe we would, but yeah, there are concerns about crossbreeding, where these genetics are coming from, and that was actually part of the trip that out to Wisconsin was with a few other scientists who are doing a study, taking genetic samples out in Wisconsin, comparing them to Appalachian samples. See, there's some theories that think all the seed that we're seeing in these hills are Wisconsin, but that's just a theory right now. So we'll see. But it's fun. It's fun to have that opportunity. I've been doing this for a bit now, and to have somebody call you and say, "Hey, you want to go to Wisconsin because your media and you're in this vein." that's amazing to get to go out there and learn that kind of stuff.
It certainly is a great opportunity. And thank you for doing it, because that allows us to get that information as well. Because you put together these really great little mini documentaries, and they're really fun to watch. And I encourage our listeners to check out Edible Mountain on West Virginia Public Broadcasting. And it's like I said, it's a fun little show. I like the bite-sized pieces. It's not overwhelming, and it's very digestible.
Yeah, and Chuck, I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on the pawpaw movement that's going on right now. So pawpaws are a native tree to the Ohio River Valley, like the Appalachian area. And I know a lot of universities, Ohio State included, have really looked at cultivating certain varieties. I know they're gaining popularity. They're doing them in orchard style settings where, they just space out the trees and they mass harvest. And, that pawpaw fruit is really getting a lot of attention. People like the way it tastes. It's unique. It's native, but it's really going to that cultivated push. I'm just kind of curious, like, what your thoughts are on that.
I do have a few opinions on that. And, I'm not a pawpaw cultivator at all. I have tried to grow some in various parts of the state. And I was like, they always seem to be growing slow. And that's what they would say if you got a plant from the nursery and whatnot, until I moved to Wheeling, which is like surrounded by pawpaws. And I'm seeing young plants producing fruit here. They're all jam-packed together. I believe these plants are very communal. I have no scientific basis on any of these claims, though. But I do spend a lot of time in the pawpaw patches. And yes, they're gaining huge popularity. My most popular short video is the pawpaw piece. I probably could keep digging in more. People do love them. Back in the older days, like late 1800s, there was pawpaw breeding contests. And I know people like you, Dan, probably are doing some breeding and whatnot. And I've seen some giant ones, big pawpaws coming out of some of the cultivation. So you would obviously know better than me as far as, do you do orchard style?
well, Ohio State has a pawpaw team. They're looking at, how well do certain cultivars pollinate. They're really looking at the way these things are pollinated, the way why certain trees in certain areas produce more than others.
Wow.
I just started planting some wild varieties just from seed, and just kind of germinate them. And, I'm not looking at cultivars or anything like that, but, I just kind of from something to do, an interest of mine, I germinate a lot of seeds that I got out of Kentucky, actually, because you're right. They're so popular. It's hard to find seed.
Right.
So I was able to get my hands on some. So I'm doing some in specialty pots, but they're not cultivated varieties. But a lot of those guys do like to graft their cultivars onto wild type rootstock. And it's just because like they found that the pawpaw really doesn't root well, and it needs to be grafted onto an established root already. So that's the way the breeding's going. The breeding is actually going to, once they establish a variety they like, a cultivar, they're able to graft it onto the wild rootstock and then propagate it that way.
No, that's cool.
But it is an interesting plant that's very unique as far as the way it propagates and the way you have to handle it.
Right. Yeah, I've always gotten a little frustrated trying to follow those directions, and I've had tons of success by just dropping big bags of pawpaws into a flower bed and watching them grow in the spring, and then pulling them and putting them where I want. I've had a lot more success germinating that way. But I've heard some cool stuff about pawpaws recently. I heard of a fellow, maybe down in the Ohio University area, that uses goats in his pawpaw patch. The goats do not eat pawpaws. He's able to keep other plants back and whatnot, and pawpaws germinate with flies. So the goats, being stinky and what they do, they bring in the flies as well. It's kind of cool to hear those little advancements we find.
That is a creative use of goats.
Right?
I mean, you're bringing in pollinators.
Right.
You're keeping weed control down. it's biological. I mean, you're bringing fertilizer,
Right. Right.
that is an interesting thing. Yeah, you mentioned OU, and in fact, the 16th, 17th, and 18th is the Pawpaw Festival.
Oh, nice.
And I know there's going to be speakers from Ohio State going on that Sunday, but there's speakers from OU, different breeders. It should be a very interesting, and you're right, it's become like an entire industry, and it's like a whole other realm of agriculture.
Yeah. There's a lot of potential, and we all know the pawpaw plates, why they haven't been hit the grocery stores. They rot quickly, and you got to pick them when they're ripe, catch them when they fall, as the old ladies used to say.
Or you have to catch them before they fall so that the raccoons don't get them first.
Right. Raccoons do love them. That's for sure.
And they do say that frozen pulp has a huge market.
There we go.
So I know a lot of breweries like to infuse pawpaw extract into their batches, ice cream, right? So there's a market for that pulp.
Right. Native Americans, I had read Native Americans would dry them and grind them into a powder and make a soup out of them. I think there's potential in all of that. If some culture has already proven that we can dry them and make a powder, that might be a great way to ship that to breweries and ice cream factories and whatnot. Here's the flavor. It's dried and ready to go. You got it all year.
Yeah, and it's lighter weight, easier to maintain. That's definitely an opportunity. And, the great thing about this whole forest farming industry is there's so much opportunity out there. And so if you do have a little patch of woods out behind your house or a big patch of woods, and you're interested in getting into the forest farming industry, please reach out to your local extension office and let them know and ask lots of questions. There's a lot of great information out there. The Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Initiative is a great resource, and I do encourage you to reach out. And I did want to touch back to something that we were talking about earlier in the show about acorns, because I did find out in the meantime that there are 50 different varieties of oak species in the eastern United States. 50!
That's incredible.
Yeah. And those are all native oak species. It's just you think about the acorn mass of 50 different varieties and the potential for those different varieties to help fill the niche of the changing climate. All of these plants are going to become so important moving forward, because we're going to start to see how each different plant reacts to the changing environment as far as rainfall and temperature. And some of those plants are going to keep migrating north, and we're not going to have them anymore. But as things get a little bit warmer, maybe something else will actually turn out doing better. But if we don't have that variety and that biodiversity to start with, we're not going to be as resilient moving forward. So do take care of your native areas and don't over-harvest if you are a wild forager. Make sure that you're following the rules and regulations that are set out to protect the plants. And if you don't know what those are, again, reach out to your local extension office. We're here to serve you and answer your questions. And thanks again for joining us today, Chuck. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck.
Thanks for having me. It was a hoot.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.